I believe in honoring people's time. I like to start on time. We're a little bit late starting, but we do have a quorum for a hearing. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. We're here to consider two very important pieces of legislation, H.R. 3826, the Electricity Security and Affordability Act, and H.R. 4118, the Suspending the Individual Mandate Penalty Law Equals Fairness Act. Today, fossil fuel-fired power plants generate two-thirds of our nation's electricity. As part of its ongoing war on coal, the Obama administration is proposing new regulations that will dramatically increase energy prices for almost every consumer and destroy thousands of jobs in the process. H.R. 3826 repeals recently proposed EPA regulations for future fossil fuel-fired power plants and prevents the agency from promulgating unnecessary and burdensome regulations for existing fossil fuel-fired power plants until the agency is able to prove that the new regulations are commercially viable. This common-sense measure will help us harness our nation's vast energy resources and put Americans back to work. H.R. 4118 is a simple bill based on a simple idea. Individual Americans are entitled to the same relief that President Obama has unilaterally provided to big business and labor unions. This bill eliminates the penalty tax levied on individual Americans for 2014 and reinstates it in 2015, which is when enforcement of the employer mandate goes back into effect. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to their testimony. Mr. Hastings, I'd like to recognize you if you have an opening statement. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask now Congresswoman Jenkins and Congressman McDermott if you would come to the table. Anything you have in writing will be made a part of the record. I'd encourage you to summarize your testimony, give us the essential points. I'm sure my colleagues are up to date on your great bill, Ms. Jenkins. So if you would, please go ahead and explain the bill. And as I said, we'll put whatever testimony you have into the record in detail.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Slaughter and members of the committee for allowing me to be here today. As you all know, the enforcement of the individual mandate penalty tax is an important issue, an issue of basic fairness, and I look forward to discussing it with you today. I would ask that my written statement be submitted for the record. And I will summarize. Basically, you all know the penalties have been extended for large businesses until 2015, for small businesses with 51 to 100 employees until 2016, and H.R. 4118 simply provides parity for our hardworking American individuals, and it delays the penalty on the individual mandate until 2015. So with that, again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Mr. McDermott.
Madam Chair and distinguished ranking member, I would like to enter into the record an article from October 20, 2000 from the Atlantic Monthly called Healthcare. I ask you to consent.
Without objection.
That article was an conversation
between... Mr. McDermott, is your mic on? Is your microphone on?
Oh, I thought my voice was loud enough. This is 2000. Distinguished Republicans said, we need to try to think of a better way to deliver some health insurance to everyone in this country. As far as I'm concerned, that means an individual mandate with individual policies, not group policies like all this Byzantine mess we've got in the insurance market right now that, frankly, insurance companies like. Now, those are the words of Jim McCreary. He was a member of the Republican National Committee calling for an individual mandate in 2000. That's 14 years ago. We all woke up this morning thinking, today's Mardi Gras. But actually it's Groundhog Day. We've seen this poorly designed, sadly staged bit of GOP political theory before. In fact, 50 times before. This is the 50th vote on the Tea Party, Koch brothers, Fox News-led Congress to gut or repeal the Affordable Care Act. This is the 50th closed rule on the ACA in this session of Congress. Now, this seemingly endless waste of precious time and resources ignores the facts. Americans want affordable care, and the ACA delivers it. The ACA has saved lives. It's brought down our spending. New anti-fraud measures, including new authorities improving payment suspensions and more rigorous provider enrollment procedures put into law by the ACA, have helped the federal government recover billions, $4.3 billion in 2013 alone in taxpayer dollars from individuals and companies that tried to defraud the health care programs. The ACA has produced historic progress in slowing health care growth. The Affordable Care Act is delivering historic results for the American people and will continue to do so for generations to come. That's no political spin, a fuzzy math. Those are the facts. And yet the Republicans are hell-bent on a 50th vote on ACA, regardless of the fact they don't have a health care reform bill of their own, regardless of the fact that our economy remains stuck in neutral with no jobs in sight. And if all this wasn't insulting or absurd enough, the bill under consideration today, H.R. 4118, is virtually identical to H.R. 2668, a bill passed on the 17th of July last year. The Republicans have already passed a bill to delay the individual mandate, something the CBO knows will result in higher insurance premiums and increase the number of uninsured. So beyond wasting time and engaging in stunts designed to make producers at Fox News happy, Republicans want to return America to the days before ACA, to the days when a cancer survivor couldn't get covered and seniors couldn't afford their prescriptions, to the days when wage workers who paid hundreds of dollars out of pocket for care or more likely went without, to the days of an ever-changing list of pre-existing conditions that companies use to drop coverage. The real business of the Congress should be standing up for those Americans and the millions more like them. That's what the American people want. That's what the American people deserve. So I suggest that you put this out on the floor if you want, but why don't you give us an open rule? Let us make a few amendments. Oh, by the way, the star of Groundhog Day was Bill Murray. He's a Democrat.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. I'm going to defer any questions that I might have until near the end. So I'd like to see Mr. Nugent. Do you have any questions? Ms. Slaughter.
You're absolutely right. It's sort of like putting this thing on repeat and leaving the room. I'm going to save my comments till tomorrow on the floor. But I do appreciate you pointing out 50-50 here, what we're doing. And remind everybody that it costs $24 million a week to run the House of Representatives. And so far, we've not got very much to show for that.
Thank you, Ms. Slaughter. Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I only have, I don't have any questions. I just think it's interesting because I'm not real sure which Affordable Care Act we're talking about. I just read today, talking about our 50, I think we're moving towards 50 with the Obama administration on the new Obamacare Act. It's not even an act, it's a suggestion. But the Obama administration is set to announce another major delay in implementing the Affordable Care Act. So this one may carry beyond the next election cycle to get through the midterms and through the presidential cycle. And it's called a major delay. I have a list here of 15 delays, not by the Congress, not by the people that make the policy, but by the administration. and you never hear one thing about it. So when we began talking about the Affordable Care Act, I'm not sure which one we're talking about. It was the one before we changed it in February of 2013, or when we changed it 3 weeks later, or 3 weeks after that, or 3 more weeks after that. Is it that one, or which one is it? Because it keeps getting weaker and weaker. If it were a strong bill, it's becoming more and more like we just have right now. So if we're going to delay the Affordable Care Act and allow insurance companies to provide any insurance they want to, what's that? I'm not sure what it is. And this delay may be 5 years after it passed, 6 years, 7, 8, 10. Wasn't that what we were asking for when we asked to have a negotiation on extending the budget or the appropriation for another year? I think that's what we were asking about. I think that's what we're asking for. And now it's a good idea, and it's done by the sweep of a pen and an announcement in the press, and poof, it's done. The law's changed again. It's a whole lot easier, I guess, than coming to Congress, but it sure is not the right thing to do. Yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Florida. Dr. Burgess?
Yeah, I'll be brief because I suspect I get to talk on this some more tomorrow. But does anybody for a moment believe that the president is not going to do a delay similar to this himself via some sort of extra constitutional maneuver? We are doing the President of the United States a favor, and that favor is so that he can keep his oath to take care that the laws of the United States are faithfully executed. We're providing him that latitude. Look, this thing is not working. It's not working on so many levels. The president understands that. As my friend Mr. Webster articulated, there has been delay after delay after delay, all of it without the benefit of any sort of legislative interference. And then on top of that, today the president releases his budget and he asks for another $1.8 billion for implementation on top of the money, the billions of dollars that have already been spent. This thing is not working. It's not working on a number of levels. The president is going to ask for relief, or he is going to provide that by executive fiat. I say let's do our legislative due diligence and provide that delay on the individual mandate that the people are asking for. And I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Burgess. I don't think I have any questions. I think our comments have been very good on our side of the aisle, and I would like to thank the witnesses for being here today and say that there are no other questions, and you all are free to leave. This closes the hearing portion on H.R. 4118. We'll now open the hearing on H.R. 3826 and invite Mr. Whitfield. And we were expecting Mr. Waxman to the witness table, but he is obviously not here. So, Mr. Whitfield, I will invite you to make your comments, and I'd say to you, your colleagues have set a good standard here in terms of the comments. So thank you very much.
Forgive me the opportunity to discuss briefly 3826, the Electricity Security and Affordability Act. This legislation has come about because of regulations coming out of EPA. I might add that John Dingell and other members that were involved in the Clean Air Act have indicated they never, ever suspected that CO2 emissions would be regulated under the Clean Air Act. EPA recently will formalize and make effective a regulation that will control CO2 emissions from new coal-powered plants beginning June of 2015. Under that regulation, it will be impossible to build a new coal plant in America because the emission standards were set using the technologies that are not currently available. In fact, the plants in which the emission standards were set, none of them are in operation yet. All of them use government funds, which we believe violated the 2007 Energy Policy Act. Our legislation simply does one thing, does a number of things. First, it says to EPA, we, by legislation, will give you the right to regulate greenhouse gas emissions on new coal-powered plants. But when you set the emission standards, you have to have a standard that is commercially available, and it has to be demonstrated, adequately demonstrated. So that's the first thing we do. The second thing, on existing plants, because the EPA said in June of 2015 they're coming forth with regulations on existing plants. In this legislation, we say you may set the emission standards for existing plants, but do a report to Congress on the impact, and that Congress will have the option to set the effective date of that legislation. So we feel like this is a common sense approach that no one expects a coal plant to be built in America with gas prices being as low as they are. But in Europe, they've mothballed 30 gigawatts of new gas-powered plants because gas coming from Russia is so expensive that the Europeans imported 50% of the coal exports out of the U.S. last year, so they're burning coal in Europe to meet their needs. So this legislation simply assures, in the future, if we determine, as the President said, we want an all-of-the-above policy, if we determine it's necessary to build a coal plant to meet our needs, that option will be available because of this legislation. And with that, I would yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Waxman, we welcome you to the committee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I have a full statement I'd like to put in the record in its entirety, and I will summarize it. The bill before us would stop the EPA from acting under existing law to regulate coal-burning power plants. Coal-burning power plants produce more carbon emissions than any other source, and unless we reduce the amount of carbon that's coming from these coal-burning power plants, we are going to see the continuation of climate change and the accumulation in the atmosphere of a lot of these greenhouse gases. These gases don't go away, they accumulate. And we're already seeing the effects of climate change because of these greenhouse gases. And some of the scientists are telling us we have a limited period of time to do something about it, otherwise it may be too late. The reason why this bill stops the EPA from acting is it says for a new power plant in the future, you don't have to do anything unless the companies are willing to do it. It becomes voluntary. And why would any company want to put a control on its emissions if its competitors are not doing it? That's the whole idea of the government being involved in environmental laws, put a level playing field. And so for new power plants in the future, prospectively, they only have to do something if they're already doing it. If somebody is already doing it, then everybody should do it. But unless they're doing it, then there's no requirement. For existing power plants, they can't act at EPA unless the Congress acts. So we'd have to pass another law. Well, we've already have a law in the books. It's called the Clean Air Act. It was passed by an overwhelmingly bipartisan majority in both the House and the Senate, and was signed by President George H.W. Bush. And that law requires the EPA to act when there's a pollutant that causes harm to health and the environment. There has to be a finding to that effect. And under the Supreme Court decision dealing with the Massachusetts case, the Supreme Court said if you make a finding, you have to start regulating. And EPA under President George W. Bush made the finding. They didn't act, but the finding was reiterated by the EPA under this administration, and they are proposing to act. And they are proposing to act under existing law because these carbon emissions cause a lot of harm. So I oppose the underlying bill. I've also asked for the rule to allow me to offer an amendment. And the amendment I'm offering is if you don't want to reduce the carbon emissions in this way, before this law would take effect, there'd have to be some other way to reduce those emissions. If we don't reduce those emissions through EPA action, and we don't reduce the emissions by something else, some other action, then in effect we're saying we're not going to reduce those emissions. So in effect I'm asking for those who want this bill to come up with some other alternative. Or if they ignore the reality of what's going on with the emissions and the harm it's doing, or deny it, if they deny it or think it's not important, then we could just do nothing. But if they want to do something other than what EPA is doing, then tell us what it is. Otherwise, we have to assume that the sponsors of this legislation and the supporters of it don't want to do anything. They either don't believe in it, the science, or they don't believe there's anything should be done about it. That's my proposal, and I ask for favorable consideration by the Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. I'm going to defer asking any questions until the end of the hearing. I'd like to see if the gentleman from Georgia has any questions. Ms. Slaughter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no questions, but I do hope that we can see fit to make Mr. Waxman's amendment in order.
Thank you, Ms. Slaughter. Mr. Nugent? Mr. McGovern?
I don't have any questions. I just want to remind the committee that the statement of administration policy, which I don't know if it's already been put in the record, but I'll ask you in as unanimous consent to put in the record, says that if the President is presented with this bill, his senior advisor would recommend he veto this bill. And I'm not sure the Senate is going to take up this bill. It doesn't seem like they would. But let me kind of reiterate one thing that I've been saying over and over and over again. We need to extend unemployment insurance for people who have lost their benefits. We need to raise the minimum wage. We need to pass comprehensive immigration reform. I think there's some bipartisan consensus on some of these issues if the leadership would get out of the way and let these bills come to the floor. And I regret that we're doing this, but if we're going to do it, I agree with the minority leader, with the minority, ranking minority member, that we ought to make sure that Mr. Waxman and others who are interested in offering amendments have their amendments in order. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Webster? Mr. Hastings? Dr. Burgess? Mr. Paulus? Well, gentlemen, I have no questions, so...
The only thing I would say to you is that the other two amendments that are going to be offered to the Rules Committee were considered in committee, as was mine, and so we would hope that we could consider all those amendments on the floor as we look at this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. Well, we have done these two hearings in record time, and so guess what that means? We're going to have a recess. Be sure no good deed goes unpunished, right? We're going to have a very short recess, we think, so we'd ask you to please stay very close by. We plan to vote before we go into votes at 6:30. So. I think probably people want to go get something to eat, maybe do some other things. So we will be back, I would say, between 6 and 6:15. Is that what they said behind me? Okay. Subject to the call of the chair, but it'll be fairly close. 15 minutes notice, yes, yeah, right. Thank you. The Rules Committee will come to order. The rule has been distributed to members and staff in advance. The chair will now be in receipt of a motion offered by Mr. Woodall.
Madam Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 3826, the Electricity Security and Affordability Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of the Rules Committee print 113-40 and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 4118, the Suspending the Individual Mandate Penalty Law Equals Fairness Act, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
Thank you, Mr. Woodall. You've heard the motion. Is there any discussion or are there any amendments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 3826 and H.R. 4118 each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor. And let me remind everybody that if these rules were separate, this would probably be the 52nd or 51st closed rule. And so we would like very much to have an open rule to have some participation by the House.
The question is on the motion offered by the gentlelady from New York. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No.
Roll call.
Well, in the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, but we will do a roll call.
I sure would like that.
Mr. Sessions, Mr. Bishop, Mr. Cole, Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Ross-Leitonen. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern. Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis. Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Madam Chair.
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the totals.
4 yeas, 5 nays.
Are there any other motions? Okay. The vote now will be on the motion made by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Roll call, please.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Sessions, Mr. Bishop, Mr. Cole, Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Aye. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Ross-Leitonen. Mr. Burgess. Aye. Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern. No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Polis, no. Madam Chair.
Yay.
Madam Chair, aye.
The clerk will report the totals.
5 yeas, 4 nays.
I believe Mr. Woodall had a comment that he wanted to make.
Well, I just wanted to thank you, Madam Chair, for recessing to allow the committee time to look at Mr. Waxman's revised amendment. It would have been easy to say late amendments are not important. You had your chance and you didn't get it in, and instead, while it was an inconvenience to the members here, it was important for the process, and I'm grateful to you for doing that.
Well,
we thank you as well.
I think it was very good that we were able to work it out. We approved every amendment that was offered. Mr. Burgess will be managing the rule for the majority.
And I will do for minority.
Okay. Mr. Burgess, do you have any other comments you'd like to make about the rule?
No.
Great. Members of the committee shall be advised that we will be meeting tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. on H.R. 2641, Responsibly and Professionally Invigorating Development Act of 2013, and H.R. 2824, Preventing Government Waste and Protecting Coal Mining Jobs in America. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.